The air in the castle was thick with an intoxicating perfume of roses in decay, a sensory trap that led Amara deeper into the labyrinthine halls. The villagers had whispered of the forbidden chamber, a room that no one who entered ever dared to speak of again. Tonight, she felt the call, an almost magnetic pull that guided her to a door carved with ancient symbols, pulsating faintly under her touch. Inside, the chamber was both a dream and a nightmare, a lush haven of silken drapes, golden light, and an enormous, crimson-stained mirror. From the shadows, he appeared. Lucien, a being of unearthly beauty, with eyes that glowed like dying embers and a voice that seemed to caress her very soul. His touch was fire and ice, a temptation that stole her breath even as it terrified her. Lucien promised her pleasures beyond mortal understanding, but the cost was steep. Their connection spiraled into a whirlwind of erotic rituals, where Amara's deepest desires were laid bare, her body and soul entwined in a dance of seduction and submission. Yet, with every touch, she glimpsed fragments of his curse, a love so consuming it had destroyed lifetimes. Amara's heart wavered between the ecstasy of their bond and the agony of knowing the price of his love. As the castle revealed its secrets, lovers who had come before her, their remains hidden in grotesque displays, she realized Lucien's power was as much a prison as it was a gift. Would she surrender fully, giving herself to the eternal night of his embrace, or find a way to escape the seductive chains of her dark prince? As dawn threatened to break the spell, Amara faced a choice that would bind her to the castle forever or destroy them both. The chamber seemed to pulse in time with her heartbeat, a rhythm that quickened as Lucien stepped closer. His touch was feather-light, grazing her cheek, and yet it set her nerves ablaze. Amara could feel the weight of his gaze, a predatory hunger simmering just beneath his mesmerizing "Do you feel it, Amara?" His voice was like velvet, wrapping around her senses, pulling her deeper into his spell. The pull of destiny, the ache of longing that binds us. Her breath hitched, her voice trembling as she whispered, "What are you?" Lucien tilted his head, a shadow of sadness flickering across his face. "A man once, long ago. A lover, a dreamer. But love is a dangerous thing, my sweet. It devours, consumes, transforms." He stepped closer, his hand tracing a line down her arm, leaving a trail of fire in its wake. "And you are my salvation and my curse." Amara felt her resolve falter, her mind a storm of desire and fear. His words both terrified and thrilled her, each syllable pulling her closer to the edge of surrender. "You don't have to fear me," he murmured, his lips brushing against her ear. "But you must choose. To step into the night with me, to taste eternal love, or to turn away and forget this ever happened." Her lips parted, her voice barely audible. "What happens if I stay?" Lucien's smile was a mix of passion and pain. "You will become mine, body and soul. You will know pleasures beyond mortal comprehension, but you will also know the weight of eternity. The joys, the sorrows, the sacrifices, they will be ours to share." As his lips met hers, the world seemed to fade away. The kiss was electric, a surge of raw emotion and unbridled passion that left her trembling. But even in the haze of desire, Amara felt the shadow of something darker. A faint whisper echoed in her mind, a warning she could not ignore. The walls of the chamber began to shift, revealing grotesque murals of lovers entwined in passion, their faces twisted in agony. Amara pulled away, her chest heaving as she stared at the horrors surrounding them. "What is this?" she gasped, stepping back. Lucien's face darkened, his eyes glowing with an unnatural light. "The truth," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "Love is never without its cost." Amara's breath was shallow, her mind warring with itself. Lucien's presence was a drug, pulling her toward him despite the grotesque tableau surrounding them. The murals on the wall seemed to writhe, their scenes of passion and torment coming alive in the flickering crimson glow of the chamber's light. "You hesitate," Lucien said softly, his voice a blend of seduction and sorrow. He stepped closer, his hands framing her face with a tenderness that belied the darkness in his eyes. "Do you fear me, or do you fear yourself, Amara? The part of you that craves this, craves me." His words struck a chord deep within her. She did crave him, in a way that defied logic or reason. Her body yearned for his touch. Even as her mind screamed warnings she was too weak to heed. "What are you not telling me?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Lucien sighed, his gaze dropping to the floor. "There is a ritual," he admitted. "A binding that ensures we remain together. It is both a gift and a curse. It amplifies pleasure to heights you cannot imagine, but it comes with a price. My existence, my curse, is tied to this castle. And should you join me, you would never leave it again. Amara's heart pounded in her chest, her blood roaring in her ears. She should have fled, should have turned and run from the chamber, the castle, the man who had ensnared her so completely. But instead, she stepped closer. Her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. And if I refuse? She asked, her eyes locking onto his. Lucien's jaw tightened, pain flashing across his face. Then the castle will claim you anyway. It has tasted your presence, and it does not let go easily. The choice is not whether you stay or leave, Amara. It is whether you stay as my love, or as its prisoner. A chill ran through her, the weight of his words pressing down on her chest. Yet, despite everything, the allure of him, of his promise of eternal passion, was too much to reason. Extended his hand, his eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. Let me show you, he said, his voice like a song she couldn't ignore. With trembling fingers, she took his hand. The moment their skin touched, the room erupted in a cascade of light and shadow. She felt herself lifted, her senses overwhelmed as the world around her shifted. They were in a grand hall now, the air thick with the scent of wine and roses. The walls were lined with mirrors, each one reflecting a version of herself she didn't recognize, versions consumed by lust, fear, and longing. Lucien drew her close, his lips brushing against her ear. This is the binding, he whispered. It is not just physical, Amara. It is spiritual, emotional. You will feel what I feel, crave what I crave. It will unite us in ways no mortal love ever could. His lips claimed hers, and the world dissolved into fire. Amara's body arched against him, every nerve alive with sensation. But as the pleasure mounted, so did the visions, flashes of the lives he had claimed, the lovers who had come before her. Their screams echoed in her mind, a symphony of ecstasy and agony. As she teetered on the edge of surrender, a single thought broke through the haze. Could she truly love a man who had caused so much pain? Or would she become just another ghost in his endless night? The choice loomed before her, darker and more consuming than ever. To love Lucien meant to lose herself. To deny him meant to face the castle's wrath alone. Amara pulled back, her chest heaving as she stared into his eyes. If I stay, promise me it will be more than this. Promise me there is something beyond the pain, beyond the hunger. Lucien's smile was sad, his hand cradling her face. There is, Amara, he said softly. But only if you trust me. And as the first light of dawn crept through the castle windows, Amara made her choice, knowing that either path would change her. Raced in her chest, her pulse thrumming with anticipation and fear. Lucien's gaze held her captive, his eyes dark, yet filled with something softer, something dangerous yet undeniably passionate. Her breath hitched as she felt herself being pulled deeper into the pull of the spell between them, drawn like a moth to a flame she knew could burn her alive. Trust me, Lucien repeated, his voice smooth, coaxing, like silk sliding over her skin. He pulled her closer, his lips brushing lightly against her forehead before trailing down to the delicate curve of her neck. Each kiss sent waves of warmth through her body, a slow, intoxicating burn that made her legs weak beneath her. Let me show you how deep the pleasure can go. How far we can fall together. The moment his lips found hers again, all the noise of the world around them faded. There was no past. No future. There was only the heat between them, the undeniable connection that threatened to consume her whole. She kissed him back, her fingers threading through his dark hair, pulling him closer, needing him to fill the empty space she'd been carrying for so long. But even as she melted into him, part of her recoiled at the darkness that clung to him, to the weight of the choices he had made and the price he'd paid for eternity. The part of her that feared losing herself completely. Lucien, sensing her hesitation, pulled back just enough to meet her eyes. You feel it, don't you? The power that courses through us when we're together. It's not just lust, Amara. It's a bond. A force that will make you want to stay with me forever, even when the cost is steep. A shiver ran down her spine at his words. The notion of losing herself completely was terrifying. Yet, the temptation to dive into the abyss with him, to experience the depths of pleasure he promised, was too alluring to deny. I don't know if I can do this, she whispered, her voice trembling. I don't know if I can give myself to you back. Lucien's lips curved into a sad smile, his thumb brushing gently over her lips as if savoring her uncertainty. There is no coming back, Amara. But don't you want to know what's on the other side? Don't you want to feel what no mortal has ever felt before? To give yourself to something ancient and eternal? Amara closed her eyes, her breath shallow as the words echoed in her mind. Something ancient, something forbidden, something that burned with the kind of passion she'd never known. Suddenly, a distant sound broke through the haze, a whisper, faint but growing louder. It was as if the very castle was alive, its walls echoing the desires of those trapped within. Amara pulled away, her senses sharpening, her mind snapping back to reality. "What is that?" she asked, her voice tight with unease. Lucien's expression darkened. "The castle. It responds to us. To our desires. To our choices. It will keep you here, whether you choose to stay or leave. But what awaits you now will be beyond anything you've ever imagined." Before she could ask what he meant, the air grew thick with tension, and the room seemed to shift. The once elegant chamber began to darken, the golden light from the candles flickering as shadows crawled along the walls. Amara felt a chill settle in her bones, her pulse racing again, not with desire, but with an unfamiliar dread. Lucien stepped back, his gaze cold and distant now. "The choice, Amara. You must make it. For once you cross the threshold, there's no turning back. But know this, once you surrender yourself to me, your soul will be mine forever. The love I offer is eternal, but it's not without its price." Her breath caught in her throat as the realization hit her. This wasn't just about love or passion. This was about a soul binding, a pact that would tie her to him forever. "I don't know if I can give you my soul," she whispered, her voice trembling with a fear she couldn't hide. His lips curled into a cruel, predatory smile, his eyes flashing with an intense, almost feral hunger. "But you already have, Amara. You've already given it to me. Now, the only question that remains is whether you'll accept the pleasure or the torment." The room seemed to close in around her as the shadows grew darker, the air thick with the promise of something both thrilling and terrifying. Every nerve in her body was on fire, every inch of her skin aching for his touch. "Choose, Amara," he said softly, his voice dripping with anticipation. "Surrender, or fight. But know this, if you walk away, the castle will claim you in its own way." Amara looked into his eyes, and for a moment she saw it, the desperate longing, the torment, the hunger. It was as if he needed her just as much as she needed him. But could she give in to this dark, all-consuming love? Could she abandon everything to live forever in his arms? Her mind swirled, torn between the temptation of eternal love and the terror of losing herself forever. The shadows around her deepened, and she felt herself falling into the abyss of desire. With a final breath, Amara made her choice. She stepped forward, into his embrace, knowing that whatever happened next, it would change her forever. The castle would be her home, his touch her salvation. Or perhaps her damnation, but in that moment, all she could feel was the pull of his lips on hers. And the terrifying, exhilarating thought that she was already lost to him. Amara's lips met Lucien's, and the world dissolved around her. The castle's haunting whispers faded into silence, leaving only the heat of his touch and the thunder of her heartbeat. She felt her body meld with his, the boundaries between them dissolving. The intensity of the moment was overwhelming, pleasure and pain blurring together into a sensation so profound it made her gasp. But then, a strange sensation crawled across her skin. It wasn't desire, it was something colder, darker. The air around them grew oppressive, and a low, guttural laugh echoed through the chamber. Lucien froze, pulling away abruptly, his eyes wide with something Amara had never seen before. "Fear, Lucien?" she asked. Her voice trembling, he didn't answer. Instead, he spun around, his body tense, his gaze scanning the room. The shadows on the walls began to writhe, forming grotesque shapes that seemed almost alive. The laughter grew louder, coming from everywhere and nowhere all at once. Amara took a step back, her chest tightening. "What's happening?" Lucien turned to her, his expression grave. "I told you this castle is alive. It feeds on the energy of those who dwell here. And it seems it's not happy with our union." Before she could respond, the shadows lunged, coalescing into a humanoid form with glowing red eyes and jagged teeth. It was a creature born of darkness, its presence exuding malice. "Lucien," the creature hissed, its voice a chilling blend of venom and amusement. "You've defied the pact." Lucien's jaw tightened. "You don't belong here, Shade. Leave us." The creature laughed, its voice sending shivers down Amara's spine. "Oh, but I do belong here. You, Lucien, belong to me. Did you think you could bind another without offering the castle its due? Amara's head spun, the words making no sense. What is it talking about? Lucien hesitated, his gaze flicking to hers, guilt shadowing his face. I wasn't honest with you, Amara. The castle doesn't just consumes them. To complete the ritual, a sacrifice must be made. I thought. He trailed off, looking away. I thought I could protect you. The realization hit her like a physical blow. You were going to offer me to it. No. Lucien snapped, grabbing her hands. I wanted to save you. To keep you with me, without the castle claiming you. But now, it's too late. The shade laughed again, circling them like a predator. You cannot cheat the castle, Lucien. It demands its price. And now, it will take both of you. Amara yanked her hands from Lucien's grip, anger and betrayal surging through her. You lied to me. You said you loved me, but you were willing to sacrifice me? I do love you. Lucien pleaded. Everything I've done was to keep you with me. I thought I could find another way. The shadow surged, and the castle trembled. The shade reached for Amara, its skeletal fingers brushing her arm. A cold, searing pain shot through her, and she cried out, stumbling back, no. Lucien roared, stepping between her and the shade. Take me instead. The shade paused, tilting its head as if considering the offer. A noble gesture, it mused. But the castle does not bargain. It takes what it is owed. Amara's mind raced. If Lucien couldn't protect her, she would have to protect herself. She glanced at the murals on the walls, the images of passion and torment, and an idea began to form. The castle fed on desire, on power, on souls. But what if she could turn that hunger against it? She stepped forward, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. What if I offer myself willingly? Would that satisfy the castle? Amara, no. Lucien protested, but she silenced him with a look. The shade seemed intrigued. A willing sacrifice? Rare, but acceptable. The castle prefers its prey to struggle, but a willing soul is rich with untapped power. Amara nodded, her heart pounding. Then take me. But leave. Amara, you don't understand, Lucien began, but she cut him off. I understand enough, she said, her gaze locked on the shade. Do we have a deal? The shade grinned, its teeth glinting like daggers. As you wish. The shadow surged toward her, wrapping around her body like cold fire. Lucien shouted her name, but she ignored him, focusing on the energy coursing through her. The castle's hunger was overwhelming, but she didn't fight it. Instead, she embraced it, letting it pull her deeper into its grasp, and then she struck, drawing on the castle's own power. She turned the hunger inward, forcing it to consume itself. The shadows recoiled, writhing in agony as the castle trembled. The shade let out a guttural scream, its form disintegrating before her eyes. Lucien caught her as she collapsed, her body weak but alive. The castle's oppressive presence was gone, the air lighter, the shadows retreating. You saved us, Lucien whispered, his voice filled with awe and disbelief. Amara looked up at him, her lips curling into a faint smile. I wasn't about to let you off. That Lucien's arms quickly faded as the castle's true nature revealed itself. The dawn light that had seeped into the windows evaporated, replaced by a chilling darkness that devoured every flicker of hope. The oppressive air returned, heavier than before, as the walls began to bleed, a thick, viscous red oozing from the cracks. Amara stepped back, her legs trembling. Lucien! What's happening? Lucien's eyes darted wildly, panic etched across his face. The castle isn't done with us. I underestimated its hunger. It's angrier now. The walls seemed to groan, their surfaces writhing as though alive. Amara's breath hitched as she saw faces, contorted in agony, pressing against the stone. Their mouths opened in silent screams. The shadows, which she thought had dissipated, surged forward again, but this time they carried blades. Suddenly, the shade's guttural laugh filled the chamber once more. You think you can destroy me, little girl? You've only scratched the surface of my power. The shadows solidified into humanoid forms, grotesque and mutilated, wielding weapons of jagged steel. They moved with horrifying precision, circling Amara and Lucien like wolves closing in on their prey. "Run!" Lucien shouted, grabbing her hand and pulling her toward the nearest door, but as they bolted, the castle began to shift. Hallways twisted, doors vanished, and the floor beneath them rippled like a living thing. Amara tripped, landing hard, and when she looked up, Lucien was gone. "Lucien," she cried, her voice echoing in the suffocating silence. A whisper answered her, soft and mocking. "He left you, Amara." Just like all the others, Amara's heart pounded as she staggered to her feet. The hallway stretched endlessly before her, lit by flickering torches. A sense of dread weighed heavy on her chest as she moved forward, her footsteps echoing in the eerie stillness. A scream pierced the air. Lucien ran toward the sound, her breath ragged. She burst into a massive chamber, its center dominated by a twisted altar of flesh and bone. Lucien was strapped to it, his body covered in deep, oozing cuts. Above him loomed the Shade, now fully corporeal, its clawed hands holding a serrated dagger. "The brave little mortal returns," the Shade sneered, turning its glowing red eyes on her. "Care to join him?" Amara's fear gave way to fury. "Let him go," the Shade chuckled darkly. "Oh, I will. Once I've had my fun." It brought the dagger down, slicing into Lucien's chest with sickening precision. His screams tore through the air, mingling with Amara's cry of horror. "Stop," she shouted. Rushing forward, the Shade's shadows lashed out, knocking her to the ground. "You cannot stop this. The castle craves blood, and I am its hand." Amara's fingers brushed against something cold and metallic, a shard of broken glass. She gripped it tightly, ignoring the sting as it cut into her palm. "You want blood?" she snarled, rising to her feet. "Then take mine." With a primal scream, she lunged at the Shade, driving the shard into its chest. The creature shrieked, its form flickering like a dying flame. The shadows writhed in agony, retreating as the Shade stumbled back. "You foolish girl," it hissed, its voice weak. "This is far from over." The castle trembled violently, its walls cracking as the Shade dissolved into nothingness. The altar collapsed, freeing Lucien, who fell to the ground in a bloody heap. Amara rushed to his side, cradling his broken body. "Lucien, stay with me." His eyes fluttered open, filled with pain. "Amara, you saved me." But before she could respond, the castle let out a deafening roar. The walls began to close in, the shadows returning with a vengeance. Amara pulled Lucien to his feet. "We have to go now." They ran through the crumbling halls, the castle's screams echoing around them. The exit loomed ahead, but just as Amara's screams echoed through the void as the dagger twisted in her abdomen, Lucien's cruel laughter reverberating in the decaying air. Her vision blurred as blood poured from her wound, soaking the ground beneath her. Yet, even as her strength ebbed away, something primal and defiant surged within her, a refusal to surrender to this nightmare. The castle responded to her agony, its walls pulsating like a living creature, feeding on her pain. Shadows twisted around her, pulling her deeper into their embrace, but instead of succumbing, Amara grasped at the threads of darkness. They burned against her skin, but she held firm, dragging herself to her feet. Lucien stepped closer, his dagger dripping with her blood. "Still fighting, my love? You should accept your fate. The castle has chosen me. We are one now." Amara gritted her teeth, her voice a raspy snarl. "You're not Lucien. You're just another puppet of this cursed place." His smile faltered, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. Seizing the moment, Amara lunged at him with the shard of glass still clutched in her trembling hand, drove it into his neck with all the strength she could muster. Lucien staggered back, choking on his own blood, his eyes wide with shock. "Not so charming now," she spat, yanking the shard free as he collapsed to the floor, his body convulsing, but her victory was short-lived. The castle roared in fury, and Lucien's body began to writhe unnaturally. His flesh twisted and stretched, his limbs elongating as his face contorted into something monstrous. The thing that rose from his corpse was no longer human. It was a grotesque amalgamation of muscle, bone, and shadow, its maw filled with jagged teeth and glowing red eyes. "You cannot kill what belongs to the castle," it growled. Its voice a guttural echo. Amara stumbled back, clutching her bleeding stomach. She was weaponless and cornered, the monstrous Lucien advancing on her with inhuman speed. He struck her across the face, sending her crashing into the wall. The impact left her dazed, but as her hand brushed against the cold stone, she felt something, a hidden lever. Without hesitation, she pulled it. A section of the wall slid open, revealing a dark, spiraling staircase. Desperation drove her forward, and she stumbled down the steps, the sound of Lucien's distorted laughter chasing her. The staircase ended in a vast underground chamber, its walls lined with rusted chains and blood-stained tools. The air reeked of decay, and the floor was slick with something viscous and dark. Amara's heart sank as she realized where she was, the castle's torture room. The shadow shifted, revealing rows of mangled bodies suspended from hooks, their lifeless eyes staring into nothingness. Some were fresh, others decayed beyond recognition. The sound of dripping blood filled the room, punctuated by faint, anguished whispers. "Welcome," the disembodied voice of the shade echoed. "You found my favorite room." Amara turned, her breath catching as the monstrous Lucien stepped into. He grinned, his teeth glinting like daggers. "It's fitting that your final moments will be here, Amara. The castle will savor your screams." She backed away, her mind racing. Her eyes darted to the tools on the walls, blades, hammers, spikes. If she was going to die, she wouldn't go quietly. Lucien lunged at her, his claws slashing through the air. She ducked, grabbing a rusted saw from the wall and swinging it wildly. The blade tore through his arm, severing it at the elbow. He howled in pain, black ichor pouring from the wound. "You'll pay for that," he roared, his remaining hand wrapping around her throat. He lifted her off the ground, squeezing until her vision darkened, in a final act of defiance. Amara swung the saw again, this time driving it into his face. The blade lodged deep, and he released her, stumbling back with a guttural scream. Amara collapsed to the floor, gasping for air. She crawled toward the nearest table, her fingers closing around a jagged spike. As Lucien tore the saw from his face, she sprang forward, driving the spike into his chest. The chamber shook violently, the walls cracking as the castle screamed in rage. Lucien's monstrous form began to disintegrate, his body consumed by the same shadows that had created him. Amara fell to her knees, her body trembling. The chamber was collapsing around her, but she couldn't move. She was bleeding out, her vision fading. Amara woke with a start. The sunlight was gone, replaced by the suffocating darkness of a damp, confined space. Her body ached, her wounds crudely bandaged, and the metallic taste of blood lingered in her mouth. The ground beneath her was cold stone, and the distant drip of water echoed ominously. She wasn't free. Panic surged as she realized she was back inside the castle, or what remained of it. The walls, though fractured and crumbling, had rebuilt themselves enough to hold her captive. She wasn't alone. Shadows danced in the corners, whispering her name in mocking tones, "Amara." Her head snapped toward the voice. Lucien stood at the far end of the chamber, whole once again but undeniably changed. His eyes were empty voids, his skin pale and veined, his smile sharp and cruel. "You didn't think you could escape, did you?" he said, stepping closer. His voice was no longer human, it carried the weight of the castle's malevolence. Amara scrambled back, her hand brushing against a jagged piece of rubble. She gripped it tightly, her knuckles white. "You're dead." "I killed you," Lucien chuckled, the sound cold and hollow. "You killed a piece of me, yes. But the castle. It ensures I endure. We're connected now, Amara. You fed its hunger, and it craves more." The room shifted, chains descending from the ceiling, their ends tipped with hooks and barbs. They clattered ominously, moving as if alive. The air grew thick with the stench of decay, and Amara's heart raced as she realized the chains were inching toward her. She darted to the side, narrowly avoiding a hook that snapped at her like a striking snake. Lucien watched, amused, his arms crossed. "Run if you must. It makes the game more entertaining." Amara didn't hesitate. She sprinted through the labyrinthine halls, the chains chasing her, scraping against the walls and floor. She stumbled into another room, slamming the door behind her. The sight before her froze, filled with people, or what was left of them. Their mutilated bodies were strapped to torture devices, their mouths sewn shut to muffle their screams. Their wide, pleading eyes followed her, begging for release. Amara gagged but pressed on. She grabbed a rusted blade from a nearby table, determined not to be another victim. The door burst open, the chains spilling in like serpents. Lucien followed, his smile widening. "You can't fight it, Amara. The castle thrives on pain, and you've provided a feast." She raised the blade, her hands shaking. "If it wants pain, I'll give it yours." Lucien lunged at her, faster than she anticipated. They collided, the force knocking the blade from her grip. He pinned her to the ground, his face inches from hers. "You still don't understand. The castle is me. Killing me would only bind you to it forever." Amara's mind raced. His words rang true, but she refused to give up. Her eyes darted around the room, landing on a flickering torch mounted on the wall. An idea sparked. With a surge of adrenaline, she drove her knee into Lucien's stomach, forcing him off her. She scrambled to her feet, grabbed the torch, and swung it at him. The flames caught the chains, and they recoiled with a metallic shriek. Lucien laughed, unfazed. "Fire won't save you. This place is eternal." But Amara wasn't aiming for him. She turned the torch on the room itself, igniting the tapestries and wooden beams. The fire spread quickly, consuming everything in its path. Lucien's smile faltered. "What are you doing? Ending this," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos. The castle roared in protest, the walls shaking violently. Flames engulfed the room, but Amara didn't stop. She threw the torch onto the largest pile of debris, ensuring the fire couldn't be contained. Lucien lunged at her again, but this time she was ready. She grabbed the blade from the ground and drove it into his chest. He screamed as the flames consumed him. The castle's screams grew louder, a deafening cacophony of rage and despair. The ground beneath Amara cracked, threatening to swallow her whole. She sprinted toward the nearest exit, her lungs burning from the smoke. She emerged into the open air, collapsing onto the grass. Behind her, the castle was a blazing inferno, its dark silhouette crumbling into ash. The ground quaked as it was swallowed by the earth, leaving nothing but a smoldering crater. Amara lay there, battered and broken but alive. The first rays of dawn painted the sky, a stark contrast to the nightmare she had endured. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, there was silence. But as she closed her eyes, she felt a cold breeze brush against her cheek. A whisper echoed in her ear, faint but unmistakable. "The castle always takes what it's owed." Amara's eyes snapped open, her heart pounding. She was free, for now. But deep down, she knew the castle's darkness wasn't gone. It was waiting, biding its time, and someday it would return, and when it did, she would be ready.